Hello, everybody, and welcome back to SchmoeTalks. It's been a minute, a little bit of a minute. Originally, the plan was to attempt to make this video look like it was filmed in one day and be as seamless as possible, but as you'll see in just a few minutes, there's been a considerable amount of time in recording this. Unfortunately, the show has been stuck on a month-long hiatus. The simple explanation for that is between my job, my personal life, and my attempts at editing this episode so that it could be as seamless as someone like me with my editing experience could make it. It at times fell through the cracks and I couldn't dedicate as much time to it as I wanted. But I've completed it and we're here, and I'm excited to finally have it released to you guys. This is the free-for-all review done free-for-all style. As you guys will know if you've watched the show, over the last few months we have been doing a flashback series in where all of our basically doing panel shows, going back and looking at the previous seasons of the Schmoedown. But one thing that we have consistently skipped in our flashback series is the free-for-all. And I skipped it for that reason because I wanted to do a very special review for the free-for-all. What we have over this episode and the next episode is a review of not just one, but all 5 free-for-alls. 1 and 2 will be done in this video. 3, 4, and the horror free-for-all will be done next video next week. Every single segment discussing one of the free-for-alls will feature a different set of panelists. Each one is at the longest 30 minutes, if not shorter. So next week's episode will be a bit of a longer one, but we have a consistent rotating panel of people talking about the Schmoedown and the different free-for-alls and some of the highlights and best moments from each one. I'm finally glad to bring this to you guys. Like I said, this took a little bit of editing, the most editing I've ever done for the show, but it was good for me because as somebody who has wanted to learn editing, I learn best when I'm forced to. So I think I've picked up and learned a lot doing this, and that will make for certain things going forward, hopefully to look a bit smoother. With that being said, though, I don't want to delay this any further. Let's go ahead and get into free-for-all number 1. But before we do, I have a little fun thing I decided to do. We're going to be doing something called the In Schmemoriam. There's going to be a montage before every new segment. All the competitors who are least likely to be talked about due to kind of being low-round competitors or quick in-and-out competitors will get their quick moment of mention. And so we'll go ahead and get to that first before we get to the first discussion about the original Free-for-All 1. And I hope you guys enjoy because I didn't want this to be, a minute or two of blank silence. So I decided to get a fun track or two to play behind these. Hope you guys enjoy. See you in a minute. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have built up to it. So now let's begin. We're reviewing the 5 free-for-alls, of course, beginning with the first free-for-all that happened back in 2017. And with me, I have a fun set of first panelists to go over it. Introducing first. He is a regular on TMG Entertainment. He is a returning guest to SchmoeTalks, and he is the man I argue incessantly with the multiverse over on After Dark. It is Mr. Nicky Sullivan joining me on the table. What is up, man?
You hate that multiverse.
How you doing?
I'm actually not the same Nicky that's on After Dark. I'm the Nicky from the multiverse that is enthusiastic about the Schmoedown. So here I am tonight. We'll close the multiverse before the episode's over so that Prime Nicky will be back on Saturday night. But yeah, excited to talk about this one, this free-for-all, particularly because I think this was the best one out of all of them. So might as well have the best panelist.
Absolutely. Joining us up next, he is another returning guest to SchmoeTalks. And he is such a big fan. He was watching this free-for-all without even prepping for the show. He just happens to be a part of this panel. Mr. Brian Nussbaum joins us on the table. Brian,
hello there. Doing good. Great to be back on SchmoeTalks. Great to talk about what Nicky said, the best free-for-all before pre-COVID. It's had really best moments ever. It's great and good to talk about them.
Absolutely. And finally, joining us on the panel, he is a first-time guest here on SchmoeTalks, but if you are a part of the fan leagues, you certainly know his name. He is Mr. Hunter Chambliss.
How's it going, everybody? Thank you for having me on tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on, man. So, guys, let us not waste any time. Let's go ahead and get into this. So, obviously, this was the first free-for-all. This was the one that kind of kicked it off and started it all. And, obviously, we're going to focus on kind of the heavy hitters, the big players tonight, the ones who really got in there and showed their stuff. Because one of the things I noticed with this one, especially while doing the research, is with the exception of those few players, no one really hung around all too long. I mean, it's very much a case of you got 1 or 2 rounds in, or you just went for a while. And there wasn't a lot of consistency there in terms of how people were performing. But obviously, we had that first table of competitors, Mr. Mike Kalinowski, Matt Nost, Jonathan Voitko, Jeff Snyder, and the man who would go on to win MVP, John Humphrey, on the first table, entered 4th, eliminated 14th. He lasted 11 total rounds and scored 28 points. And for the sheer shock of it, was named the MVP of it, because to this point, and quite honestly, every point since, he's never really held up to that same type of performance. This was this magic moment for him to shine. And I think he certainly earned it. Any one of you can go first if you'd like. Kind of, what are your thoughts on his performance overall in it?
Yeah, shocking. It's like you said, like he hasn't really been competitive since. Like it's this kind of shocking thing where like beforehand it was still like in the infancy almost of the Schmoedown. Like they were kind of like finding. I actually think this is like the prime of the Schmoedown. I don't think that they have really surpassed themselves since then. And before that point, they had not gotten there. So I think this is like peak Schmoedown. And Humphrey comes out of nowhere, and like after that, every single time he played, I'd be watching him and he'd do embarrassingly bad. Like he wouldn't just be doing bad in the matches that followed. He would be getting questions wrong that are the most entry level questions. So it's really confusing on how he even did so well in this match. I mean, I don't know if there's a conspiracy there, but I always remember his entrance at the Skidamarinky Dink. I liked that. Like he comes out to that song, and that's what another thing I miss about the Schmoedowns. I like the actual like songs. I don't like the songs now. So like I felt more feel back then.
Copyright.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I mean, it's just it was better.
You liked hearing music. You like hearing like popular music. Yeah, for sure. Brian, Hunter, either one of you, what are your thoughts on this gentleman right here? And can I just say, I didn't put any extra work into finding these pictures. It's a mix of a old Collider wiki that still gets updated and a Schmoedown wiki, or where these pictures come from. And that is a perfect picture for him. But what are your guys' thoughts?
For me,
I will say this. Oh, go ahead.
For me, I was surprised at how well he lasted. Like, he didn't do good in teams, like losing record, didn't win a single match in teams that much. But then free fall came. That's like, as you said, like 20 rounds or so. Even with the same horse that Baby Arnie lost with. And I agree with Nikki. I missed having the classic music. Like, I know we have JT's music and McQueen's music, but I just missed this classic music that they used.
Yeah, absolutely, Hunter.
I will say this, as a big fan of the Real Reject channel, I knew that these guys, both Greg and John, knew a lot about movies. But it did surprise me how well he lasted. But rewatching it, what you notice is he would pull answers at the right time just to barely survive. Like, he would have like maybe 2 or 3 points, or 2 or 3, whatever, but enough to survive other people. Yep. That's not a knock against John. That's just how it is. Like, if you can get enough answers correct in a free for all while another one doesn't, then you're going to survive a lot of rounds, because someone is going to not know what you know.
Yeah, exactly. That's like in every year there's an example of it. It's like the randomized factor behind it, right? The idea of like some rounds you'll have people going, 4-4, and we've seen multiple examples, 4-4, 4-4, one person gets 5, you're all done. And then some rounds it's 0-0-0-0, but somebody got one question right. Then they're also eliminating everyone, So it's just about how the individual round kind of goes. So then we move on to not the biggest moment, I would imagine, of this one, but it's worth mentioning. We get this after kind of settling into it, having a couple people last, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, whatever, rotating on and off the table. We get this series murderer's row of competitors that last a number of rounds. So we have here Alonzo Duralde, who enters 11th. Doing the stats for this was a little weird. He entered 11th, but he technically was eliminated 13th, but that's because all the people in between. He lasts 6 rounds and scores 18 points. Dan Merle enters 12th. He leaves 24th and scores 47 points after 12 rounds. John Roca enters 16th, is eliminated 23rd.
That is a very old picture, Aaron.
It is an old picture.
Young outlaw, man.
No cowboy hat.
That is a 20-year-old picture.
I am sure he appreciates that picture is the one that I'm using. All right.
God, man.
He lasts eight rounds and scores 28 points. And then William Viviani enters 19th. He's eliminated 22nd, lasts 6 rounds and scores 24 points. But
I was still a fetus when that picture was taken.
You probably listen. I'm sure he appreciates that picture can still be found on the internet. Like, come on. Look at that. He's got like good skin. He's glowing.
Good skin, good smile. It's a good Photoshop job. They shot him from his good angle. He got his eyebrows done for it. Like, there's that Friends episode where Joey has to like get his eyebrows plucked for his headshots. He clearly did that before that headshot. I mean, because that's not what Roca's eyebrows look like.
So we enter this weird thing. So once Alonzo enters these 4 players, we enter this period, and I'll just run the names off. Perry Nemroff, Mark Ellis, Coy Jandrew, Rachel Cushing, Elliot Dewberry, Mark Bernardin, David Griffin, Drew McWeeny, Nick Scarpino, and Ricky Hayberg. Those are all the competitors that enter when any of these 4 are sitting at the table. The only person to last more than a second round with these competitors was Drew McWeeny, who did go 4 rounds. But the fact that you have competitors who are respected or would go on to be respected, whether it be like a Mark, more recently someone like Perry, who's really stepped up, Mark Bernardin, people liked at the time, Rachel Cushing, obviously, and even McWeeny to an extent. It's like, these are competitors who are really good Schmoedown competitors, and they are barely hanging in against this onslaught of people who are just bringing it in this moment. I'll go to Brian first. What were your kind of thoughts or memories, or when you went back and watched it, on that situation of just these seats being held up this whole time?
For me, it's as you said, Murder's Row. player after player. Corey Janu, still competitor before manager. Perry, Cushing, Dewberry. I even love Ricky when he came in and says, "Guess what? I'm going to win" or something. Where he lasts like 1 round or like 2 questions or so. Even though maybe on his entrance with like different stuff, he putting out like different toys or so. Roko's response like, "Oh God, not this guy." I think it was during this round where they had a Harry Potter question and Roko's response was priceless.
Possibly that sounds right. Hunter, what do you remember about this when you were going back and watching? What's kind of your feeling on this section of it?
It's literally the worst look of the draw. If you got any of those numbers when you saw this Murder's Row, I'm sorry. You have to bring your A+ game to survive. That happens in free-for-alls, man. It all comes down to the luck of the draw and who is in those seats at the same time of each other. And gotta feel bad for those people who pulled those numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Nikki, any thoughts on this kind of Murderer's Row section of just these guys holding it up?
Yeah, I kind of just forgot about that round of like Perry and like the people that like had brought it. I forgot Perry had even played in that free for all. This must have been after like the Tough Beats days.
Surprised that Perry missed that psycho question.
Yeah,
I agree.
But yeah, like the guys like Roca, Bibiani, like those are the names you still see today. In today's games, they're still playing consistently. I don't, honest to God, don't have much thoughts about the players in this game as much as the format, the questions, what like it used to be back in that day to what like it's evolved to now. It's a very different flow where like, and even the players at this point, like a guy like Coy, back then they really. They had a level of self-awareness back then that really added to the game. Like this is just like a fun thing that they're doing much with like the actual music. They didn't care about like the copyright stuff and all that because they're not trying to make money. It was just for fun. And then in later years, the more like you try to add to it, sometimes it can sort of take away. So I think this was the Schmoedown like in its purest state. And that's what I really liked about like those that free-for-all in particular.
It's always about the money, Nikki. It's
Yep.
always about the money.
Yeah. Unfortunately, when you have to pay performers, that's what it's about.
Yep.
So then let's get into the moment. I feel like is the one that most people remember. So we have this Murderer's Row table. In particular, at this point, Drew McWeeny, again, he only goes 4 rounds, but he's joined them and has held down an extra seat that was being rotated. And in walks Mark Andreyko. And on top of the legitimately great performance, we'll talk about that round, obviously. On top of that round, Andreyko comes in 25th. He's eliminated 33rd. He does last 6 round and puts up 22 points. So it's not like he came in, had a one and done, and then was taken out the next round. He is one of the better players of this free-for-all. But obviously, it's the XX5 XX moment where you have these players, and at that point, especially, I don't remember if these were done live back then. I can't honestly remember, but
I think it was pre-recorded.
In terms of streamed, I don't remember if they actually streamed them with people watching.
It wasn't all streamed, though.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so people are watching this, probably blowing up the comments, going, "Oh my God, one of these guys is going to take it!" And in walks unassuming Andreyko, who at that point was really nothing more than a 50-50 player, truly, and he just knocks the table clean. And get out of here.
The perfect amount of self-awareness for this game, even today. But like he's one of the players that like the personalities where now everybody has a personality and an overinflated ego, and they add stuff. It's subtraction by addition. Like the matches are longer than ever, but they're less entertaining than ever because of the hyperbole. Back then, the hyperbole, it's like we were saying the other day about like the directors and stuff for directors of things where you go in with hype on certain directors and the the work doesn't always speak to the sentiment. Back then, the work spoke to like the work spoke for itself. Like the free for all spoke for itself. And a guy like Andrenko, who's just like so like self-aware, unassuming, writes Wonder Woman comics. He's still perfect for this game today because he has just such a dry sense of humor. So he's one of the guys I always liked seeing playing, and he was good in that free for all.
See,
Yeah, he was.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Continue.
I'm the opposite of Nikki. While I like this era of the Schmoedown, I think this current era is the best era because you can see everybody putting.
I think
in
it's the
the
worst.
work.
Yeah, but my problems with it are more COVID related.
Talent. They're elevating each other, and every single match, there's something intriguing about two competitors who are on the same battlefield, elevating their knowledge against each other.
Yeah, all my problems with the game today are more because of the way that they need to shoot the matches. I think I'm looking forward to see what they can do when they go to studios because the whole StreamYard thing, it's one could argue that there are fan leagues that do the StreamYard thing just as well, if not better. They need to get back to what they do well, which is this studio, just kind of like this fun party atmosphere that we had in this first free-for-all, which they just did at the Collider Studios. It was just like, I think, a Saturday afternoon where they just had everybody in, they're having drinks, they're having fun. Like, that's the atmosphere that I like because it feels like...
Yeah, but again, with COVID, you have to find ways around that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, for me, like that's the fun part of it. Yeah. And all of the questions were high quality back then as well.
For me, well, compared to digital and studio, for me, the digital matches have been great, but I miss the studio matches where you have everyone in the studio reacts to the matches and the questions. And plus, the moment when XX5XX happened, even if you watch the reaction later party did, there was like a whole bunch of people reacted to it.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer them in studio, yes, but I feel like the gameplay today is, when it comes to the actual matches, I love these matches more than I did the matches back then.
Yeah, and I don't know how to transition that properly back in, but it was certainly a good piece of discussion. I don't know how to properly transition that one.
Yeah, I went on there. Sorry.
No, you're good, man. Hey, it's all quality content, right? It's Schmoedown, it's content, and it was a good discussion. I think there's an argument for both sides. But well, this free-for-all wasn't played digitally. They were in a studio, and once Andrenko wipes the desk, we go back to that rotational kind of thing. Jay Washington.
I'm just imagining Andrenko wiping down the desk. Right when you said that. Wiped the desk?
That would be the COVID version.
Okay. Yeah.
With Jay Washington, Jason Inman, Robert Burnett, Stacey Howard, Ken Knapsack, Hector Navarro, and I'm probably missing one or two names, but players that are like file in, they get one or two rounds in, they step out again. And then we get down to the final moment where Sam Levine, I believe if I remember correctly, Sam Levine clears the table that he's at, clears the table.
Well, the Pixar question.
With one competitor left, and out walks Tom Dagnino, of all people, and that's the moment where okay, cool, so Sam Levine has won the free-for-all, and so he does.
But undeservingly so, because the man doesn't know the serial number for the Enterprise. I think he said, 7? And Dagnino said 8? Blasphemy. Shame on you, Sam Levine. Shame.
Idiocracy.
Idiocracy. It is idiocracy. They don't know the number of the Enterprise. NCC 1701. Not A, not B, not C, not D. NCC 1701.
He's so passionate. Sam Levine enters, and I will say it was incredible to watch, but it is the most unceremonious win of the series of events. He enters 34th. He wins it. He lasts 2 rounds and scores a grand total of 6 points. It is very this is the equivalent of a damn, I got lucky. Like, You play one good round, and then you go one-on-one with Tom. And I literally think a cat with a whiteboard has a good chance at beating Tom. So Sam had a great shot, and he won it. And then obviously, that kind of plays into, and I'll let you guys discuss both angles of it, because the win does relate to the prize. How are the prizes used? Now, for this year, the MVP, John Humphrey, as I said, and let's get that Playboy shot back up one more time. He did not get a prize for being MVP.
That's worse than that doctor shot that Beer always pulls up on After Dark.
He did not get a prize for being MVP, but Sam Levine did get a title shot for winning the free-for-all, and he elected to use it at the next live event that they held, the Collider Collision, at which, after Dan just won the belt back in a three-way, Sam walks out and says, yeah, let's do it. And considering
I didn't realize you could use your free-for-all win as a Money in the Bank briefcase cash-in. Okay.
Oh, you didn't realize it at the time?
No,
yeah.
I didn't realize it either.
I thought it was like the winner of the free-for-all would take on the champion at Spectacular, where they would build a match.
No, the idea was always you could use it when you want. And I've said this before on the show, especially when we talked about this section of the season and that match in particular on our Flashback series. I really wish that they would do more matches like that, but I understand why they don't, because Dan looks damn exhausted by the end of it.
Yep.
Like there are very few times I've seen people look physically exhausted playing movie trivia, and that's one of them.
Probably because those chairs are so damn uncomfortable.
2 matches one day.
Like, I'm exhausted by the end of this, and that's just because sitting down sucks. I wish we could just like we walk around.
That's why Bib stands all the time.
Yeah,
sure. That's why he's
the Leaper just doing a podcast together, just leaping around doing flips. It'd be fun.
Yeah, so I'll go to Hunter first. What are your thoughts on, just overall briefly, Sam winning and then how he cashed in his title shot?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Sam Levine, all the way back to Freaks and Geeks. So glad to see him win. Was it a good way of winning? No, because you had to beat Tom Dagnino. But yeah, congratulations to Sam. It was a great free-for-all. Again, at the time, I didn't realize that you could use it as a Money in the Bank cash-in whenever you wanted. I thought it was like set up for Spectacular. So when he cashed in, I was like, wait, can he do that? Oh, all right, nice. We have a second match.
Yeah, and I will say that was and again, we talked about this when we did our Flashback episode. That was the first time, because Sam had like a 3-4 record when he played that match. That was the first time I think anybody legitimately looked at him as if he could win a title, because not only did he come in and play, he played well. Like, he didn't beat Dan, but he kept with him the entire time, and he made him work for it more than Riley did in that 3-way match, especially.
Yeah.
So it was a good.
Like Riley, we didn't even mention Riley.
He was one of the early. He was early on, but he didn't. He was one of those like 2 or 3 rounders. He was gone.
He's one of those staples of the league, and it's just like we didn't even mention.
2 rounds actually.
Yeah. Yodi.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have all the numbers in front of me. They'll be on the slides. Yeah. But
numbers. Yeah, I like numbers.
Yeah, Nick,
numbers.
Any thoughts on Sam's win before we go ahead and move on?
For me, it was very surprising. Like, after he did well in free-for-all, he managed to not only cash it at Collision, as discussion in the Flashback series, won 2 tournaments and even won the belt at the end of the season. I'd like to touch on the Ken Nastock free-for-all moment. He was surprising. He was on the desk and managed to be at the table.
Yeah, he did. He hosted the event, and then on the 31st slot, went over to the table. Yeah. So before we wrap up, I'll go around one more time and give each of you a chance to talk about something you haven't gotten to bring up yet. Nikki, go ahead.
About the same thing and the Dagnino thing. And I'm asking both as an asshole and as someone who doesn't know. How much of like the draw and the placement of the questions was produced in this day?
So
I believe.
Well, the questions in particular were all written by the same person. The questions
Yeah.
weren't put in any certain way.
Okay.
If you're
They weren't
talking
put in
about
any certain order.
if you're talking about the competitor poll, most of it is random, but they have admitted that for show's sake, some of it is picked. So I'm pretty sure Dagnino at 35 was specifically placed. But like Sam at 34 was probably a random draw.
Yeah,
the Royal Rumble.
That just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. But I get like the wrestling like comparisons and stuff like that. It's just and they were not planning on Sam wiping the table like at second to last. The Dagnito thing is supposed to be in there with four other people, and then he's the first one out, and then it gets down to it. Like it's made to be a joke at that point. He's not supposed to be a 1 versus 1 sudden death scenario.
The fact that it went to 1-on-1 is
that's why it's better not to manufacture, not to overproduce, because when you let it play out naturally, what you would have had in that scenario was an epic like finish of 4 competitors that actually deserved to be there at that point.
Or I mean, you could have got, a lower tier person. Like I get wanting to kind of manufacture storylines that make sense. Being like, well, let's get Dagnino 35 just for the joke of it, and then we'll come in for the 5 of them.
Yeah.
Because that would have worked. But thing is, no one expected Sam to just clear the board.
Yeah.
So
if you're gonna do it that way, then have Dagnino as like a floater. Like, don't give him a number, and then just like go, okay, this is the round we're putting Dagnino in because it's a joke anyway, and he's not going to beat these guys. And like that way, it's produced, but it's not. It's not damaging.
Yeah. And
I much more intelligent guy than I myself gave him credit for at that time. We've had him on TMG After Dark, and he had a mason jar full of tequila. He was walking down the street outside in the dark. If I did that in my area, I would have been arrested. But he manages to get away with it in Hollywood because who knows why? I think I know why. But yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead around the table and wrap it up. Nikki, anything else to add about the first free for all?
No, I like this one the best. Just everything I said. Like I think that after like the COVID stuff is all over, I'd like to get back to like grassroots Schmoedown in studio. Maybe I don't know if they have plans of using like Ken has that great studio with Josh and Yodi. They could use that for matches. This is really I do think the Schmoedown at its prime. And just rewatching it, I like the figures in the background, and there's that shirtless picture of Brett Sheraton that they had on the Schmo Snow show back then. So it's just going back looking at it, it's like, wow, these guys were weird, and they knew it. They were just what I was saying before about very self-aware, knowing what you're doing, knowing how ridiculous it is, and not trying to make a buck off of it necessarily, but doing it because it's fun.
Absolutely. Brian, closing thoughts.
For me, it's a very great free for all, the first ever, and I love the different compare that came out, like Perry, as you said, Rachel, Dagnino, Riley, Dan, all these great competitors, and I was hoping for Harlow to compete in it for a bit.
That would have been a lot to ask. Hunter, any closing thoughts on it before we move on?
This is my second favorite free-for-all. It could be recency biased, but I think this past free-for-all is one of my favorites. It's high up there, especially because of the final 2. But overall, this was a very fun, entertaining, a lot of big moments. Yeah, dude, it was just a lot of fun.
All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on. I thank all of you and have respect for all of you for being here. But we got a show to do, so I'm going to kick your asses to the back. And we are going to go ahead and move on to the next free-for-all. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and we are back. We got the first of 5 free-for-alls over, and now we are ready to go ahead and get into the second free-for-all, which, while not all that much different from the first in terms of how it was operated, was ever so slightly bigger. And that's an improvement because we had more players, which gives us more succeeding stars from the free-for-all to talk about. Let's go ahead and get into it, but first, we have some panelists to introduce, or for this one, should I say a panelist, because introducing first and technically only, he is the host of The Supernova Show here on TMG Entertainment. He is a former guest of the show. He is Mr. Colton Roberts, joining us on screen. Colton, how is it going?
It's going pretty well. I really can't complain. Just another evening, I guess.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and get into it. Guys, don't worry. Just because there's 2 of us for the second free-for-all, I will definitely compensate later, but we will get to that when we get there. Colton, let's go ahead and break this down, man. We get to have this kind of one-on-one discussion about the second free-for-all, which, upon kind of re-examining and re-looking at these, to me at least, is kind of the least interesting of the free-for-alls. I don't know if that's a conclusion that you or anybody else has kind of come to, but there were some solid performances in this, but there wasn't as many insane things that happened, especially when you compare it to the first one, which not only had, I'd say some real surprise contenders, but that XX5XX moment. But we'll go ahead and kind of get into it first, as I'll bring up our first few competitors. And kind of as what we'll see is the pattern with the free-for-alls, a couple of people off that first round of 5 did really, really well off the bat. We had Sean Gerber, who was the first competitor on the table. He would leave 7th after 6 rounds and 16 points. Likewise, Frank Moran would enter 3rd. He would exit 9th, lasting 8 rounds for 24 points. And Lon Harris, looking a lot cleaner than he does in that picture, would enter 4th. He would leave 14th, lasting 11 rounds for 41 points. So, Colton, what were your thoughts on kind of the opening rounds and the first set of competitors that entered?
All right. So to be honest, besides Lon, I did not remember the other 2. So that tells you how much I remember from free-for-all 2, or at least the beginning stuff. But I know Lon always does a good job in these things. And obviously 41 points, that's great. But now thinking back, I do kind of remember the other 2 doing fairly well. And I don't remember who else was on the table besides those 3. Definitely do not. But
and it's honestly it's not as surprising, and this is what I kind of say, where like there were cool moments but not as momentous moments from this free-for-all, because Sean Gerber and Frank Moran, I think you could probably say, gave their best performances in the Schmoedown in this moment. Sean Gerber, of course, most known for his team stuff. He was a part of, I believe, Superhero News was the team, and then he was paired with Scott Manson, the Anarchy Tournament. Neither of those endeavors really ever worked out for him. He played one IG match, which he lost, and then the other thing he played was he has, I believe, won both exhibition matches they have played, the Marvel exhibition matches that were played. He's won both of them, and that's what he's best known for. Yep. Frank Moran, kind of a similar situation. I believe he only ever played 1 or 2 teams matches, did not win those. He's played 1 singles match in the tournament last year when he played in against... who did he play in against? I forget offhand, but he played in against somebody. He did not...
Wasn't it Marisol?
No, Marisol was Bonnie, I believe.
Oh, yep, you're right.
Yeah. So I can't remember who he played in against, but he was not the victor, unfortunately. So it's just a case of neither of these guys have ever really been able to catch success. And so I think that's why they're not as well remembered, but they certainly did really well in this one. This was kind of their moment where even in the audience, you could kind of hear it, especially because at least the 2 other people that were on the table when they came out were Dagnino was second. No one expected him to last. But Robert Montano, who was looked at, one of the first fans that stepped up into the Schmoedown, he was really well liked at that point, and him being the first one out amongst a set of players who really didn't have all that much success at that point was a rather interesting thing. But yeah, you're right. It was kind of a slow open. We had a few players come out in some of the first rounds who had barely played or never played the Schmoedown. April Dawn, who I believe is JTE's girlfriend, played her only Schmoedown match in this free-for-all. She lasted one round. Coy played early on. He lost. Taylor Robinson, who played a 1IG match and has only just returned as a faction member, entered. She lost very quickly. So not a lot in these opening rounds here, but in the middle of the competition, which is where we'll go next, we got three of the heavy hitters of this competition. We had Whitney Seibold, who enters 10th. He leaves 13th after 6 rounds for 22 points. Drew McWeeny enters 12th. He is eliminated 23rd, lasting 11 rounds for 42 points. And then the MVP, William Bibiani, enters 20th. He lasts 47th, going out in the final round for 21 rounds and 86 points. So go ahead and kind of get into what you remember about that section of the free-for-all, this middle chunk.
Yeah, I remember they all did really well. I still contend that the Beast should have won this match. They had the weird, different version of the final round at the time.
Yes, which it should be stated, that was a rule that wasn't played with, and we didn't get into it in the first one because, again, it doesn't really affect it, so you don't remember. The rule back in the day, to kind of explain it to people who may not remember, was once the final competitor walks out, whoever wins that table is the winner of the free-for-all. So it's not like now where, like with some of the more recent free-for-alls, they played down to 3 at the table, 2 at the table. They played till they were eliminated. It was just if you won that one last round, you were the overall winner. People don't really remember that rule because Sam Levine cleared the table and then Gucci walked out. So it was a one-on-one scenario. So I don't think people really remember that that was the rule that was in place. But with this, it was, and we'll get to it in a second with the winner, it was a 5-person table that she won on. But you're right. Bibiani, I mean, I'll let you get back to it. Bibiani really did play great on this one.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't. I'm trying to figure out what I'm allowed to say to not spoil other free-for-alls that have already came out. So we're just going to skip my opinions on that. But I think he's great overall. McWeeny, he is an absolute beast as well. Not to coin Bibiani's,
different kind, yeah.
But Whitney Seibold, like he does such a good job in these things, and then maybe it's just how different the free-for-all is from regular trivia, but I don't think he's ever, like, he'll do well in these kind of matches, but he hasn't really gone anywhere with it outside of free-for-all play.
Yeah, and I think it's a case of, and I if I'm incorrect, if you remember something that deters me, please let me know. But Whitney's always been a very strong first-round player, and that's essentially what the free-for-all is. It's all first-round level questions with the odd, trickier, maybe that's a 2-pointer kind of thrown in, just as a twist to kind of mess with the players a little bit. But it's basically all 1-pointers, and that's what he's good at. Where Whitney has really struggled in his matches is even not so much round 2 at times, but round 3. It's just he has the breadth of knowledge, not the depth of knowledge, and that's where he really gets hurt, especially in singles. That's where he's been hurt every time. But yeah, like in events like this, usually when he plays very well. He gets a few rounds through it before he gets knocked out. And that's because he is a very good round 1 player.
I could not agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go ahead and move on to kind of the almost the final section. We had a couple more heavy hitters come in towards the end. We had Ethan Irwin, who was at this point 1-0. He had only won one match, played one match, and this is where kind of like we've seen, as we'll get to with other free for alls, he was kind of the player who made his impact with the free for all. Every year, it seems like there's one player who comes in and surprises you with how well they do. With the first free for all, as we discussed, it was really John Humphrey, which is why even though Dan Murrell played better than him, he won the MVP award. With this one, it was Ethan. He enters 29th. He's eliminated 44th. He lasts 15 rounds for 56 points. Alongside him, we had Ben Bateman enter, who played pretty solidly. He enters 31st. He leaves 33rd after 6 rounds for 17 points. And then, of course, we had the winner, who, all things considered, this is more of a solid win than I think people remember. She enters 44th. She does go on to win it, lasting 4 rounds for 19 points. It should be said that with a max of 5 points per round, Brienne only missed 1 question in her 4 rounds. That's a pretty solid performance, especially when compared to Sam Levine's the year before. So I have to say, she is a more impressive winner. I think, and we'll get to it obviously in a second, what happened after she won is what I think downgrades it a little, why people look back on it a little lesser. But her win is easily more impressive than what Sam Levine had to do to win.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, Sam did run through that original table that he was at, but then he played Finstock. And, I mean, a monkey has the potential to beat Finstock in movie trivia. So
I think I said that exact same thing. Like, you know, you're basically handed him the title by playing the bit and sending Dagnino out last. Whereas Brienne had to eliminate both Bibiani and Irwin in order to win it, which is a fair thing to do. Obviously, it would have been very curious to see if they had played it, how they play it today. Would she have been able to keep it up? Because again, 19 of 20 questions is an incredibly high bar to hit. That's really, really good. Especially in all consideration for Brienne, who was always a good player, but I wouldn't think anyone ever looked at her as an A-list player. That's some A-list level play, you know? And so I thought she did a really, really solid job there with that win. And then obviously, you know, and you can get into the other two if you want as well, but I remember watching this and thinking, man, that Irwin dude is rather impressive. And so what were your thoughts on these players before we move on into the next bit?
Yeah, like, I mean, you could definitely see that Irwin was going somewhere. And then, yeah, absolutely. You could absolutely see that Irwin was definitely going to go somewhere. And, I mean, he ended up winning the championship. And same thing with Ben Bateman. Like, he didn't do as well in this, but until this moment, he had what, 1 singles match?
Yeah, and he did not win it.
Yeah, and then he was just a teams player. And he was the worst, at the time, member of his team with Andrew Guy. Andrew Guy was the stronger player. So, like, he came in and he did very well. For someone who's the weaker player of his team action, he came in and did really well. So, and then Brienne, yeah, you're absolutely right. She had to beat both Irwin and Bibiani, who after this match, or I think it was, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was after this match, went on to become singles champions.
So, yes, both were after this match, yes.
Yeah.
So then before we get into it, I'm going to bring up 2 more things before we kind of start to wrap up this free-for-all. So I talked about, or I will talk about, excuse me, with wording there, but I'll talk about with one of the later free-for-alls, what is the biggest gap of players who are unsuccessful in the free-for-all, like the 1 or 2 rounders getting dropped, right? This free-for-all, though, and this, again, one of the reasons why I call it maybe the least impressive free-for-all is, again, this has the second biggest gap, essentially, of players who kind of drop out, where Irwin comes in, and then once Irwin comes in, Bateman does come in 31st, but 30th is Adam Holovic, and then shortly following, you have Dewberry, Roca, Burnett, Riley, Sabina Graves, Vanessa Fitzsimmons, Josh McCouga, Finstock, who got 2 chances to play this year and did terrible on both of them. Dale the Dude, if anybody remembers that gimmick. Hal Rudnick, RB3, who might be the only impressive performance out of this lot. He did go perfect in 2 rounds before getting eliminated. And then Emma Fife. And again, there are players in there who are legitimately very good. You know, Roca's a great player. Riley's a great player. McCouga's a very solid player. Not RB3. Robert Meyer Burnett wasn't a joke yet at this point in terms of his play in the Schmoedown. He was still, you know, a decently respected player. Yeah, just rather interesting how there was just this pit of these people can get around maybe 2. Like I said, RB3 got 3 rounds and he went perfect twice, but that's the most impressive that anybody got out of this section. But I have to bring up one person in particular who was a couple of people after this, but he was just rather unimpressive. And it's so weird because usually he's so good at the Schmoedown and moments like this, but of all people, Dan Murrell walks in and just goes 1 round. He scores 2 points, and just this is the least impressive performance I've ever seen from Dan Murrell here. And then he goes on to get beat by Andrew Guy. Like, what? No, so obviously I'm kidding. This was the free-for-all, and this is the only time in this entire video I will highlight somebody who did horribly, because I think it's the only time somebody came in, tanked, and still had a moment outside of somebody pissing themselves, but we'll get to that later. But, you know, yeah, this is the only time. I mean, Andrew Guy, you know, and they do the whole bit where they have the Dan Murrell music start playing. They make him think it's going to be him. And then Guy makes his return to the Schmoedown and very unceremoniously, while screaming, kicking, and shouting the F word all around, goes out after 1 round. Colton, I don't know if you were watching live when this happened or when you were watching after, but what were your thoughts of kind of this moment right at the end of the show?
Okay, so I remember thinking, I thought it was brilliant because obviously Guy had been suspended for tackling Roca, and
right.
They have Dan the music going, and I'm a huge pro wrestling fan. So stuff like that happens in professional wrestling. Like someone else's music, and then they come out. And I thought it was brilliant. And I wish he had performed better. If he had performed better, it would have been great. And then, obviously, where this all went was great as well. And I loved every second of it. But, yeah, I enjoyed it. I watched it live, all that fun stuff. But
yeah. So let's get into kind of the last piece of this free-for-all, which is where did it lead to, right? So we talked about with the first free-for-all, the MVP, John Humphreys, did not get a single thing for it. The winner, obviously, was Sam Levine. He got a title shot, which he cashed in against Dan Murrell. With this one, the MVP did get a prize. He got a number 1 contenders match, which he, if I remember correctly, he cashed it in. And if I remember, was Jeff Snyder the match, or was that match already played?
So they did an entire bit. They did an entire bit about like Jeff Snyder had just played a match, and then they did like a cool CGI thing of Bibiani coming back from the future and saying, "I have to choose you as the number 1 contenders thing, or it will disrupt the time stream," or some mess.
Oh, okay.
And so that's how they formed that match. And then that match ended up turning, because Sam Levine retired, that match
that turned into Andreyko.
Yeah.
Right. So he beat Schneider in the #1 contenders match, which then put him into the title match against what would be Mark Andreyko beating Ethan Irwin.
Yeah.
To get that title match. And then, so the other kind of two matches that followed, Breanne Chandler gets the win. She is the champion. And she chooses to cash in her prize in teams. Going up again, once Sam Levine left, the belts are thereby vacated. And so she goes into her team's title match with Brian Baldwin, who is a Schmoedown debutant, sick in the head, and the Shire Wolves, who is the #1 contenders, would thereby win that match and go on to play Who's the Boss in December for their first defense. And then obviously, as we referenced, he didn't clearly have any sort of win or award, but story-wise, this free-for-all did lead to Andrew Guy versus Dan Murrell, in which Guy definitely scored more than 2 points to TKO Dan Murrell. And again, this all plays into the narrative of this is the least impressive free-for-all, and I think the winnings even cement that further. Obviously, as with the first free-for-all, we've kind of talked about this match on our Flashback episodes. I've talked about it, so I'll briefly get into it here before I let Colton go. The Bibiani-Andreyko match is only not one of the worst title matches, because Harloff's title matches exist. Quite frankly, especially compared to the first time they played, Bibiani and Andreyko was a fine match. And then I've said before, Bibiani is kind of the forgotten singles champion. Like, I think if there's one champion that people forget won a singles belt, it's Bibiani, because it was such a quick hold, and it came at such a weird time where people were stepping away and coming back, and there was this weird seismic shift. I just don't think it didn't work out probably as well as he would have wanted it to. And he lost it very quickly to Roca. The Shire Wolves thing, everyone's had their say in it. One of the ideas I actually suggested when we talked about it on the Flashback episode, which I know the way the matches aired, this was announced prior, but I don't know recording-wise how far in advance these matches were recorded. I always believed that she would have been better. It would have been better story-wise if she had gone with Drew McWeeny, because her and McWeeny at this point had already been announced as being in the tournament. And I think for story's sake, it would have been way better to have her pick the person who she was going to play in the tournament with no matter what. So if they lose, then they go into the tournament together with a match under their belts. If they win, then McWeeny gets his team's belt back after having just lost it because Sam retired, and that would have been a great story moment. And I also think, and again, the Shire Wolves were great teams champions because they later did earn it, but they didn't earn this victory because one half of your opposing team had never played the Schmoedown, let alone a title match. I just think it was such a weird scenario. It really did feel like the only time that a belt had ever been handed to someone. Like, to me, it's even worse than the Alex Damon Bruce Green match, because at least with that one, they kind of admitted they were handing it to him. Like, Damon wanted the match, and so they had to scramble to get someone, and that one went the way it did. But this one was worse to watch, because I think the Shire Wolves deserved that great match to earn their title, and I think it really hurt them in the beginning winning off of this match, and to the fact that they had to kind of fight for their legacy in the next few matches, which does suck.
I agree with that completely. Like, even if she had, brought back 6 degrees and teamed with Stacey Howard for the one time, and then they lost to the Shire Wolves, at least that would have been connection, because I might be misremembering, but I don't think he has ever played again. So that one match.
No. And so I learned this years later, because I didn't know who he was at the time. For anyone who doesn't remember, the gentleman's name was Brian Baldwin, I think was the gentleman's name, who played. He was a member of the Adam Carolla Show, which was the radio show that Mark and Christian used to go on before even Schmoes Know. It's the reason they have the Schmoes Know podcast. So that's who he is. So he's just somebody they've known for a number of years who somehow got put in that situation. But yeah, he has never come back.
Yeah, and this is the match where I've always thought I wish the Shire Wolves had won the match in a different way. Like, they should have won their championship against an actual team. And I will always wonder, would they have ever been champions if Sam hadn't retired? I don't think they would have. In my personal opinion, I don't think they would have. And that is not a popular fact around the community that we are in.
I don't think at that point they could have beat Above the Line, because I think their chemistry as a team was off the charts. And that year, Sam had beaten both Clark and Rachel in a singles match. And that's not to diminish the Shire Wolves at all. I think they certainly would have played as well as they did when they won. I just think to that point, Above the Line were that much better than every other team. I think if Sam hadn't retired, they would have gone on a very similar Patriots-ish run. Maybe not as long, because at that point teams were quickly getting better, but I think they would have gone on a run. Because the fact is, the Patriots were the team that could beat everybody, and when it eventually came down to it, Above the Line not only beat them at the gameplay aspect, but they shredded them in the Iron Man match and showed they just had more raw knowledge than them. And so, yeah, if Sam hadn't retired, I think they would have gone on quite a run with a few wins. I think even at that point, Who's the Boss might have had a better shot at beating them. And again, that's not a detriment to the Shire Wolves, because I think part of me thinks the only reason they became as good as they did to win and defend a couple of times is because they took the hate they were getting as motivation.
Yeah.
And it fueled them to get better. And they did on all fronts. It's just unfortunate that that is the way they got handed the belt. And I say handed because it really was. They were handed the belts.
Yeah, I agree completely. They were absolutely I think it's always weird. That's Clark's legacy, is she was never singles champion.
Nope,
at least
couldn't do it.
Yeah, at least Rachel, she was IG champion.
Yeah.
So there's a thing there with that. But Clark, that's her legacy, is she won the belt from Brienne and a person who has never played the game before that and never has played it again. So
and I should say, just in case the comments start lighting themselves up, again, that's not to say the Shire Wolves didn't later earn it, because Who's the Boss were a great team, and they beat them fair and square. And everyone else they played and beat, whether it be I don't remember if they actually beat Corruption. I know they played that final teams match against each other, but whether it be, I know they beat The Odd Couple, Critically Acclaimed they defended against. The teams they played and beat, they earned that win. But it's just unfortunate that the first match that landed them with the belt is one of those kinds of matches.
Yep.
One of the few. So with that, guys, thank you so much for tuning in and kind of discussing the fallout and the actual event itself of the second free-for-all. And I think the fact that we spent a third of this video or more just talking about the aftermath kind of shows the fallout of the second event. I think when they put up a post about what's your favorite event in Schmoedown history, I think it almost universally was put last. It's just kind of, unfortunately, the most forgettable of the events, but that doesn't mean there weren't gems of performances in there. It was the first time we really saw Bibiani go off. Brienne played solid. Ethan proved himself. And even up top, Gerber and Moran, players who were never able to fully capitalize on it later, showed they had the stuff. Colton, thank you so much for joining me. You are an esteemed guest. I'm glad I had you, but I'm going to boot you to the back very quickly, and we are going to move on because up next is live and in person, Free for All 3. See you there. Well, before we get to Free for All 3, we're going to go ahead and close out this video. God bless month ago Aaron's heart. He really thought this could all fit into one video, but that's one of the things you learn when editing is not everything goes the way you want it. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. Thank you to everybody who was involved. A more full thank you will be given at the end of part 2, but I wanted to leave you guys with something because I know it seems ridiculous to have taken a month-long hiatus and to only come back with just this video. But it's not just this. I made the best use of a month of delays, and I was able to not only get some upcoming episodes planned, but I was even able to get a few of them recorded. And so as a little bit of a consolation for those of you who are watching, I wanted to reveal the schedule because we have some upcoming fun interviews that I'd love to talk about. So let's get to it. Up first, next week, June 14th, we have our part 2 of our free-for-all review, free-for-all style. That's right, we're going to be covering the last 3 free-for-alls, free-for-all 3, 4, and the Skybound horror free-for-all. And following that, we have a couple of really fun interviews. On June 31st, Fan League legend and Schmoedown question writer Jeremy Adams, someone I've known for a long time. He's a good friend of mine. Jeremy Adams joins the show, and we discuss not only about the old days and the fan leagues, but we discuss a couple things to do with the writing of the Schmoedown, and we get into some of the aspects of that. And I had so much fun talking with Jeremy that I thought, what's another interesting person we could speak to in the Schmoedown who doesn't often get brought up into the limelight despite their contributions? And so on June 28th, we have David Benitez, better known as David B., who is probably the lead composer of original composition music for the Schmoedown. He will be coming on the show, and we're going to get into everything. I said this jokingly to him on the day, and I stand by it. It's one of the worst interviews in terms of structure that I've ever given, but it's also one of the most fun videos I have ever had the pleasure of recording. We talk about everything from Schmoedown music to the failures of our education system right now. It is an insane conversation that, if anything else, is entertaining as hell, and so I hope you guys enjoy that one. Following that, on July 5th, we'll get back to our Flashback series, reviewing part 1 of season 6, and I will be joined by a guest from another Schmoes-related show, as Matt Majot from Schmoes of the North joins us to discuss season 6, part 1, the first third of season 6. And then following that, July 12th, I will be joined by somebody who is not just a Schmoedown competitor, is not just at the time of recording the interview, he was a contender. By the time the interview comes out, he may be the #1 contender, depending on how the match works out for him. But he's also a buddy of mine and somebody I've known for a long time, and a former member of TMG, for those who don't know. Robert Parker joins the show, and this will be a fun one to have. Again, it's kind of like with Jeremy. It's just 2 guys who have known each other for a few years having a fun conversation, and I'm looking forward to it. So that's right, guys. We have part 2 of the Free For All review, interviews with Jeremy, David, and Robert Parker coming, and the continuation of our Flashback series. And that's just what's filmed. That's not counting what's planned, coming soon to you in the near future. So with that, guys, thank you so much for tuning into part 1. Please be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe. Stick around for more SchmoeTalks. Be sure to check out all the other shows that we have here on the channel, and we will see you guys next time here on SchmoeTalks. Take care, guys.